duly approved by Parliament. Let us be unequivocal. This is not a technical quarrel. This is certainly not an administrative oversight. And this is not a routine policy disagreement. For us as a minority caucus and many discerning Ghanaians, this is certainly a constitutional issue. This is a governance issue, and by extension, this is a democratic accountability issue. Now, the begging question is why we're speaking out today. Article 252 of our cherished 1992 Constitution is clear and ambiguous. It vests in Parliament, and Parliament alone, the authority to determine the formula for the sharing of the District Assemblies Common Fund across our 261 MMDAs. That authority is neither symbolic nor advisory. It is binding. In accordance with this mandate, Parliament approved the 2025 DACL formula allocating some 7.51 million Ghana cedis for the fiscal year and distributing it based on scientifically grounded equity drive model. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, nonetheless, the 2025 ministerial guidelines introduce in effect a parallel allocation regime, one that imposes new mandatory percentages, new expenditure categories, and new national priorities that do not exist in the parliamentary formula. In doing so, the executive have stepped beyond guidance into redesign, and that by every standard of constitutional law is ultra-vires. Now, the central conflict. The parliamentary formula is not arbitrary. Emphasis mine. It's not arbitrary. It is neither political. It is not improvised. It is data-driven and empirically structured. It is built upon these, amongst others: location quotient, need factors including health facilities, educational infrastructure, water coverage, and road networks, equality components, service pressure indicators, weighted allocation under scenario B, 40%, equality, some 56%, needs, 4% service pressure in the formula. Ladies and gentlemen, this design ensures that districts with greater deprivation receive proportionately greater support. It is the very essence of equitable development. In contrast, the ministerial guidelines mandate fixed national percentages as these: some 25% for 24-hour economy markets, some 10% for cheap compounds, some further 10% for school blocks, 10% for boreholes, 10% for sanitation, 5% for administration, and 20% for legacy projects. These percentages appear nowhere, absolutely nowhere, in the parliamentary formula. In fact, they are not supplementary. They are not interpretive. They are substitutive. Ladies and gentlemen, now to the legal breach. Section 1261 of the Local Governance Act 216, 2016, Act 936, permits a minister to issue utilization guidelines. Utilization guidelines, but only to facilitate implementation within the parameters of the approved formula. The law does not empower the minister to assign new national percentages redesign allocation structures, override parliamentary weighting mechanisms, and create a power formula. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2025 guidelines exceed administrative authority and encroach upon constitutional power reserved exclusively for Parliament. This is a textbook case of ultra-vires executive action. It undermines Article 252. It weakens Act 936, the Local Governance Act. It distorts decentralized governance. It threatens the financial autonomy of our MMDAs. Why this matters for every district. This is not an abstract constitutional debate. It has tangible consequences for real communities. 1, equity is undermined. The parliamentary formula directs more resources to districts with greater development deficiencies. Fixed ministerial percentages erase this distinction. A deprived rural district and a relatively resourced urban district are forced into identical expenditure templates, regardless of their need. Equity is replaced by uniformity. Justice is replaced by rigidity. Decentralization exists to empower local planning through improved medium-term development plans. The guidelines impose a top-down structure that constrains assemblies and reduces them to implementers of centrally prescribed projects. Governance roles are blurred. The expanded approval roles assigned to members of parliament under the reserve fund provision risks distorting constitutionally defined responsibilities. MPs are legislators and oversight agents, not executive managers of district expenditures. Now, administrative confusion is created. Now, MMDAs now face 2 contradictory authorities, and they are not far-fetched. 1, the legally binding parliamentary formula and the administratively forceful but legally questionable guidelines. This creates uncertainty, delays procurement, disrupts budget cycles, and exposes public officers to legal risks. Our democratic responsibility. Ladies and gentlemen, we speak not in opposition to development priorities. We speak in defense of the constitutional order. When executive authority exceeds the lawful boundary, silence becomes a complexity. The strength of our democracy lies not in the absence of disagreement, but in the courage to correct constitutional deviation. The rule of law must not bend to administrative convenience. Parliamentary supremacy in public finance is not an option. It is foundational. Our call to action as minority caucus of the Nile Parliament, we respectfully call for 1, immediate withdrawal or revision of the 2025 DACF guidelines. They must be aligned strictly with the parliamentary formula. 2, Parliament reassets its constitutional authority. Article 252 cannot be diluted by administrative circulars. The DACF administrator to implement only the approved formula. Section 125 of Act 936 is clear and ambiguous. The administrator must act within lawful parameters. MMDAs who adhere to parliamentary formula in budgeting. Assemblies must not be compelled into constitutional expenditure patterns. Sustain civil society and media oversight. Transparency is the oxygen of decentralization. Ladies and gentlemen, DACF capping and arrears. The law the breaches, the fallout. Having addressed the constitutional concerns surrounding the 2025 DACF guidelines, as a minority caucus, we now wish to move to another matter of equal gravity, one that goes to the very financial sustainability of our local governance system. This concerns the issue of DACF capping and the persistent arrears owed to our metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies. Ladies and gentlemen, the strength of decentralization does not rest only on lawful allocation formulas. It rests on timely, full, and predictable disbursement of funds. When the common fund is capped, withheld, or delayed, development stalls, contractors go unpaid, and communities suffer the brunt of this. It is therefore imperative that we examine not only how the fund is structured, but whether it is being released in accordance with constitutional and statutory obligations. No capping, the Constitution and Supreme Court are unequivocal. Ghana's 1992 Constitution sets a bright line in Article 2522, and I quote, not less than 5% of total revenue of Ghana, unquote, must be allocated to District Assembly Common Fund. Ladies and gentlemen, this allocation is neither advisory nor subject to ministerial discretion. It is a binding constitutional command that anchors fiscal decentralization and shields local development financing from arbitrary and interferences. The Supreme Court cemented this position clear in the Kodo case, declaring that neither Parliament nor the Minister for Finance may allocate less than 5% of the total revenue to the DACF, and striking down legal provisions that had the effect of limiting the DACF to a smaller base or capping it below the constitutional minimum. The 5% rule is a constitutional flaw, not a negotiable target. Article 252 was designed as a flaw to guarantee predictable resources for districts. Any downward adjustment violates the Constitution text and the spirit. The Supreme Court decision in the Kodo case reinforces the DACF must be calculated on total national revenue, not a narrower definition, and cannot be reduced by capping states of administrative practices. In short, compliance is mandatory. Non-payment or underpayment is unconstitutional. Simpliciter.